Hello, and welcome to the Gang Culture Podcast, a series educating you about gang culture. This season, we hope to expand on the lived experiences of gang and street life, explore further research surrounding the appeal of gangs, all while bringing together an array of unique voices to inspire, empower, and cause change. Whether you are listening at home, school, or on the way to work, we hope you enjoy and learn something that can be shared with others. Welcome to another episode of Gang Culture. I'm your host, Ellis Rouse, and I'm joined today by special guest Nancy Petrara-Stafyleras. Hi, Nancy. Could you kindly introduce yourself, who you are, and what you do?
Hi, my name is Nancy Petrara-Stafyleras, and at first I want to introduce myself as that I'm a mother of two beautiful daughters and a wife of a husband that I've been with for over 25 years this year that we've been married, and met through our career in working in law enforcement over 28 years ago, and still together. So that's the core. That's really the core of how I'm here, and who I am, and really what catapulted me into this realm of working in the field of law enforcement for many years. So I'll tell you a little bit about really how I started my career when I first started with the New York City Police Department, and that's how I met my husband in the police academy. We had met as young rookie officers and started our career together, and throughout my career. When I started with the police department, it was really all about wanting to help people. I came from a family of law enforcement and wanted to follow in my dad's footsteps. That my father was with the New York City Police Department as well, and it was kind of something that I took very proudly in working for NYPD, because it was part of like my family legacy. But when I was working as a young patrol officer, one of my first experiences, and I guess we can talk a little bit about that later, about how I really started to enter into the realm of gangs, and how it had such a profound effect on me very early on in my career. So during my first few years as a rookie police officer in New York City, it was during the mid to late 90s is when gangs really started to have a tremendous effect in the city, and it was really learning as we were going and being exposed to different things and different incidents that were happening. And because of, like I said, something, very early on that happened in my career, it really gave me the truly the passion to really try to understand the gangs in so many different ways, and try to understand the sociological part of it, the mindset of it, and how and why somebody would want to get involved in this type of life, and why they would make these choices. So I was very fortunate that I had the opportunity to then, with about three and a half years on, to get transferred over to the New York City Police Department's gang division, which was probably one of the most premier gang units, and they were on the cutting edge, and people were coming all over the country to speak to some of the detectives that were working in gangs, because there was a culture that was happening. And during that time, a lot of different regions throughout the East Coast and up in the northern regions of the country, people really didn't want to talk about that there was a gang problem. It was so a lot of people try to work together kind of on the down low, because sharing information, because a lot of these jurisdictions, they were like, they didn't want a deal that said, that they didn't want to mention the word gangs or say that they had a gang problem. But like I said, during my time in the gang division, I was, very young. I was a rookie officer, and I worked with probably some of the best detectives in the entire country. And this is and some of those mentors that I worked with are people that I'm still in touch with today. They're like literally like OGs and legends in the field, and known not only nationwide, but on an international level, because of the groundbreaking work they've done. And I was so fortunate to be a part of something that was bigger than myself during that time. So as my career, was really taking off working in the gang division, a lot of things in my personal life were happening as well. We had gotten married, And long term, we started to really look to see like what would be, for, best career wise, and also for our, for our future. Just wanted to start a family. And we felt making that decision we had opportunities to transfer to the state of New Jersey in different departments in law enforcement. And my husband left NYPD first and went into New Jersey State Police. I stayed back for about almost for 2 years while, because I couldn't live in New Jersey and work in New York. So the first couple of years of our marriage, I worked in New York City and he worked in New Jersey. And during that time, I was, September 11th happened, and it was very hard to transition into another state because of everything that was going on. And we were kind of really in my heart was really still very, very connected to what was happening in New York City. And I just, when the opportunity came, when it was time for me to leave New York to go to New Jersey, then I had the opportunity to work in a department, and I went to the Passaic County Prosecutor's Office. I was very fortunate to have an opportunity to work there. And they sought me out because of the work that I had done in New York City and working in gangs and working specifically in the realm of intelligence and developing information and doing a lot of the analytics with gangs. And they were starting this gang unit. They were getting a grant, through the federal government. So it was something that was like a brand new project that they haven't had before. So it was something that we can start from the beginning. And they wanted to take a lot of what we did in New York City and try to do that on a county level. And we had a lot of challenges, a lot of growing pains, because again, in working in a county as opposed to working in the Mecca and in the New York City, there was a lot of challenges that happened. And but we overcame a lot of those challenges, made a lot of great networks, and a lot of the networks I had in New York City, those connections kind of carried over into my job in Passaic County in New Jersey. And I like I said, because of that connection, it really helped me really get myself centralized, and being a new person coming to another state, not really understand the dynamics of how New Jersey worked. But because of those roots in New York City and the people that worked in gangs in New York that had those tentacles over into New Jersey, because again, we started to see a lot of the spillover from New York coming into New Jersey, that we had to learn to share information. We had to work together because, like I said, a lot of the administrations and a lot of these different departments throughout the state, they didn't want to admit that they had a gang problem. They didn't want to have that word gang within their jurisdictions, because they felt like it was something that would be frowned upon, instead of really facing the challenges that were happening and try to get that head on. And like I said, doing that for a few years and working with a lot of the departments, we started to see this little shift and this change after a lot of investigations that were being done. We started to see a lot of women now were coming into the fold. They were starting to take some of the roles as some of the leaders, and some of the people were getting arrested in a lot of the cases that we were doing. They had to have people take over, and who was best to do that could kind of to try to go undetected. And we started to see a lot of females coming into the fold of within the foundations of gangs. And like I said, nobody was even talking about it. It was like an untapped, an undeveloped resource that people they didn't really want to, they didn't understand it. And I said, and me being an analytical person, I started looking for statistics, I started looking for information, and there was nothing out there to document that there was any information regarding female gangs. So I started to develop a lot of the information on my own, and started to see this pattern, and working with different sources that we had, and some of the sources that we were working with female members. And through that, it started to metamorphose and started to really grow, that we started seeing more and more women into different investigations, and they would be coming up within the hierarchy. So with that, and I said, I actually did my first training, my first presentation in gangs, on the female side was actually in Delaware at a gang conference over at the Diamond State Conference in Delaware, through the gang association that I've been a part of for the last 20 years, the East Coast Gang Investigators Association. So they were having their annual conference, and they're like, listen, nobody's talking about female gangs, and we know that this is something you work, and let's put together a great presentation. a great training for the annual conference, and it just kind of really took off from there. And through that, and then I started to work with on the social work side of it. One of the professors at Rutgers had come to me, and they wanted to have me speak to a young class of criminal justice majors to talk about there was a lot of females that were in the class. They really had an interest in understanding about gangs, about female gangs, and I decided to go there. I was very fortunate, very humbled to be able to go speak to this these students at Rutgers down in Camden. And then from there, it kind of, like I said, then it morphed again, that I was able to develop curriculum for Rutgers University, for the School of Social Work, and I started now teaching the social workers and developing that curriculum. It started from going from the the enforcement side. Now I was kind of going into the social side, which again was something that I always had, like that great. I wanted to kind of get into the minds and try to understanding and working with the social workers. Even though I was the teacher, I was a student because I learned so much from them. I was very good at speaking to a lot of the gang members. They felt very comfortable speaking to me, and trying to teach some of the social workers how to maybe penetrate, how to speak to the females, because again, we wanted to try to, we sort of, you realize you can't arrest your way out of this issue. And it was like I was like a sponge. Just wanted to learn more and more on the social worker aspect. And I taught at Rutgers for over 10 years, developing this curriculum, and it truly made me stronger and better to really understand the job that I did when I was going out into the field. And during that time as well, because I was doing, really doing groundbreaking work within the female realm, that I had an opportunity. One of the producers of a TV show that was on a few, back in 2008, 2007 and 2008, when, like I said, nobody was really talking about female gangs. They had a series that was going to be on, a documentary called The Secret Lives of Women, and they talked a little bit about how women have these secrets in their lives, and again, about stereotypes, and people don't think that females they weren't in gangs or involved in this. And I had an opportunity to actually work on the documentary. I had to consult in the documentary and actually air in the documentary. And that, like I said, that was such, again, another humbling experience. And though that's really changed me in so many ways, to be able to do my job in law enforcement for over 28 years, and not only said have that have that enforcement side, but really have that compassionate side and that empathetic side when we're dealing with our females. And being, now I said, when I first started, I was not a mother, and I wasn't a mom until many years after that, in my career. And it really changed my perspective becoming a mother, because I learned throughout my career that it's not these stereotypes that people think, oh, that girls in only certain areas can become gang members, and all our girls are at risk. All our children are at risk, no matter where they are. And that change, that really taught me the things that I was preaching, that I saw as a mother. The things I was talking to the social workers and talking to law enforcement when I was training about the female gangs, and saying, it's about validation. It's about how these girls are trying to find this connection. And I had to be present for my own children to ensure that I had a balance, being a mom and being a police officer, a detective, doing doing all these different things, to be able to make sure that my girls weren't, they couldn't, that they were getting what they needed as well. So maybe that they couldn't go the wrong direction or go the wrong route because of things I said I was teaching, but I had to practice what I preached as well as a mother. So that's, and really, I said, if the how I am here today, and how I got here, and retired last year from New Jersey. And I left, law enforcement after, like I said, after 26 years back in, well, actually, it's almost 2 years, back in 2023, in June of 2023, retired, and then came over and left New Jersey, and I'm working here down in Florida right now. So trying to figure out what the next phase and what kind of impact that I can make, and continue on and figure out what I want to do now when I grow up.
Well, thank you for that. That you had a great career, it sounds like. And I'm from New York City, born and raised in Brooklyn. And
Me too, born
I,
and raised in Brooklyn as well.
okay, what part of Brooklyn?
I grew up in Brooklyn South in Marine Park, Sheepshead Bay area. So I went to high school in Brooklyn, James Madison. Woo, celebrating the 100th anniversary this year for 100 years. We had some really great some alumni. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was actually alumni of James Madison High School. One of the great women, mentor, really the true trailblazers of for great women. And so very proud to say I'm born and raised in Brooklyn for those Brooklyn roots never leave you.
They never do. I'm from Crown Heights, and I also grew up in Flatbush,
Oh,
and
okay.
I spent a lot of time in Bed-Stuy.
Well, my dad was actually when my dad was a police officer. My father worked on D. Calvin Clausen over in Bed-Stuy. My parents grew up in Crown Heights. My mom, she was from Carroll Street, and my dad lived over on Buffalo and Park. And my husband, when he grew up in Gravesend, but he was actually when he was a police officer, he was a police officer in Flatbush and on in the 6-7 precinct on Schneider Avenue over in by Nostrand and those areas there. So we know the areas all of Brooklyn very very well.
Yes, yes. And you spoke about the gangs in the 90s. So that was the time that I actually joined uh, GKB at that time in the 90s because in my area we were riddled with drug dealers and at the time I just felt like the neighborhood needed needed some type of protection from within. And I looked at the gangs as some sort of protection for the neighborhood. But obviously it comes with bad, and there's good with bad, and um, so I understand what work you were doing and how things did get out of hand. Obviously, it came from jail, from prison, from Rikers Island, and then it spilled over into the streets.
Yep, we were
So
right in Grand Zero, and like was saying, one of my first experiences with being exposed to gangs and not really knowing that was involved in a situation was actually I was when I was like I said I was out of the academy fresh 6 months. And like during the summer in Brooklyn, right, you got Coney Island, you got Prospect Park where everybody's chilling, everybody's hanging out. So I was working in Brooklyn South, and everybody when you from during the summer when you go to a summer detail in your precinct. So I left Bay Ridge and I was sent to Park Slope. I was sent to the 7A precinct, which we covered Prospect Park, and you got all different cultures, diversity throughout Prospect Park. So on one side you got PPW, you got all the brownstones, everything else. On the other side you have the 7O precinct where we had, I said, on the other side of the park where we had a lot of the gang activity that was going on. And like when we started, like I said, when I was on in the early 90s, this was all going on, and we were learning as we went. So basically, when I got into the academy, when we had our initial gang training, we were like, all right, Bloods wear red, Crips wear blue. They were telling us to secure our weapons because one of the big things with the gangs is that they, to get a cop to disarm a police officer, that was like a feather in their cap. So it was really, we were learning as we went along. So one of my first experiences dealing with gangs, and especially on the female side, I was working one night. I was working on a 4 to 12 in Prospect Park in Brooklyn. And you're on a foot post with really nowhere to eat, nowhere to go. Again, you're in Prospect Park. Where are you going to go to do your business? If you got to go to the bathroom or whatever. But so again, you're kind of roaming around. And we were fortunate because before gang division was the big division in New York City, they actually had a small unit called the Cage Unit. It was the citywide anti-gang enforcement unit, and they only had maybe like 10 detectives in it. And they actually, what they called turning out, where we went to roll call, they were in the same spot as the Prospect Park detail. So I'd see a lot of these, I was, like I said, I was a rookie officer. Like I was afraid to talk to people. Like, I mean, like as a respect, now, not that I was because I'm a very talkative person, but it was more that out of respect that you had to kind of know your place and know where you kind of fit in. And we'd see these detectives and I was like, wow, like these seasoned detectives coming in and out. So I ended up going out on a job, and we hear, like I said, where you're on foot, so you can only respond to certain things. And one of the issues was that we were on one precinct radio frequency and another precinct frequency. So sometimes if something happened in one side of the park, the one precinct area wouldn't know what was happening on the other side, because we were assigned to one specific precinct, but we covered a lot of different areas in New York City. So working one night on, like I said, on a 4 to 12, you're thinking it's a typical night, and all of a sudden we hear an assault in progress coming over the radio. And again, now it's within walking distance where the adjoining post and I can go to, and they're saying assault, and we hear multiple calls. So then you kind of know that the call is real. So myself and my partner, we marry up from the two posts. We walk together to respond, because you don't want to respond by yourself. So all of a sudden we see this whole melee breaking out. We see people fighting and getting dust is all, and I could always say almost like it was a cartoon. Like you see like the dust coming up on the from the dirt in the park. And we're like, all right, we see some girl now, she's getting pummeled, and she's in this circle, she's getting pummeled. So now you said, we're thinking the first thing, right? Try to figure out what's going on, render aid to the victim. Your training and everything starts kicking in. So the next thing we know, we try to figure out who the victim is. We're trying to break everything up. So we find out, again, see the girl who's the victim. She's getting, pummeled, bleeding, face is getting beat up, and these people all beating her up. So we try to break up the fight. We try to secure our victim. We try to figure out what's happening. And the next thing I know, the female who we're trying to help actually starts attacking my partner. And so we're calling for help. We're calling, waiting for backup to come. And we're in the melee trying to fight. I'm trying to secure my weapon. I don't know. It was like something out of a movie. So now all the cars are coming, everybody's responding, and now everybody they're breaking everybody up, who's getting arrested, the ambulances are coming. So now the dust settles, and we get called to go up to the detective bureau, and myself and my partner are sitting up there. Thank God, everybody, we were okay, whoever, there wasn't like any, but people had to go to the hospital. It was like, but it wasn't anything, like I said, life threatening, but it was serious. So we go up to the detective bureau, and then one of the guys who was the detective, this guy Ralph, who I was friends with for and we ended up growing up together. We knew like mutual friends, because everybody in Brooklyn, everybody knows each other anyway, right? All the cops and the firemen, everybody knows one another. So I go up to the bureau, and he starts asking me like what happened, and I start telling him what happened, and he's like, "No, Nancy." He's like, "Do you know what happened?" So I'm like, so of course. I'm a talker. I can make a long story longer. Like I just keep going on. And he's like, "No, Nancy, do you know what happened?" I said, "Ralph," I'm like, "I'm telling you what happened." He goes, "No." He goes, he's like, "I'm going to tell you what happened." He goes, "You and Tommy walked into a gang initiation." He's like, "The girl that was your victim was actually getting jumped into a gang." And I was like, I was like dumbfounded. I was like, this girl was getting the crap beat out of her, and meanwhile we're trying to save her, and now she's going after us because we were, and from what I found out after, is that we were breaking up her initiation and basically ruining it for her to get into a gang. So it was like, I was like dumbfounded. I say to myself, oh my God, like somebody could take this abuse to be part, like, listen, I took, I went through a lot to join the police department. I had to go through training. I had to go through all this to be part. And again, if you think of the word gang, right? A gang could be anything. I always say that during my training. It's like a gang, right? Group of people, right? They have a common symbol, common denominator. They have a common goal. So, right? The police department, maybe gang doesn't always have, I'm not saying that cops are gangs. I'm just saying, but the mentality, like, I went through all this because it was something that I wanted to do since I was 5 years old, and I was willing to risk my life for that. And again, knowing that I took that job, that I could risk my life every day, what I was doing, it really put to perspective to me when my first interaction, I was like, oh my goodness, like this is the job that I took, but somebody can take that abuse to find, like you said, to find love or find some kind of protection. And that really triggered me, that I became like almost obsessed. Like I wanted to learn and try to understand like how somebody can, that here we were, again, we're trying to save this person, and we were the enemy to them. and really said that really, I have to say, is what was something that really, like, and I remember this. I remember it for the, like, 'cause I could visually remember everything that happened, and now I said can try to understand. And they said from doing this and doing that job for so many years, like you can see. And the one thing I said always when I would interview gang members, I'd say, what led you here, like what led you to be, and I always say, like, that's kind of like the final step, like when you're involved, you get that interaction with the law enforcement. Like we don't want you to have, we want to have a good interaction. We don't want to be at that point where you're sitting at the table, you're cuffed or whatever. But I'm always like, I always try to understand that, because that was like really very early on what really drove me to want to understand, and almost like have this thirst to try to really understand, like on that side, because I know what drove me to want to be a police officer. And when I would not stop at anything to not go through to become a police officer. But if you think about the mentality, it's really, again, maybe not in a positive way, but you can understand how somebody can kind of turn that into that direction, and why they make those decisions.
Absolutely. So I wanted to ask you about the pathway into gangs for women and girls. What did you find there was a path? What was that pathway?
The pathway that I started to see in a pattern, and it's just speaking to a lot of these, and again, and I say kids, a lot of these, younger women, and young girls that were getting into it. It was really something. It was very matriarchal, and they had this void. And I said the most common denominator is that, again, there was like this void in their lives that they. And I think for the women that I found, it was more of an emotional connection than maybe from the the males. Like I said, they had that the bonding, that that machismo that they wanted to be. But for the women, I think it was even harder for them to kind of escape from it, because it was more of that emotional connection that they had to the gang. It was like that they were looking for that validation. There was something that was missing in their life, that led them to this, and to this type of, because again, they were getting that validation or feeling important to within, especially when when they would, and I'd say all the time, I'm like, they're not just the girlfriends of these guys. A lot of times the guys would bring them into it. And from back in the day, right? If these girls were getting sexed in, they weren't respected. They were just kind of like property within the gang. But you started to see later on, that these girls were committing like violent acts, and they were really working to prove themselves, and they wanted to be respected. And said once the people that they were involved with were starting to, again, when they were getting jacked up, or they were going away, they felt it's almost like they wanted to, they wanted to take over, because it was like that matriarchal connection that they had, because it was something that was just, they weren't getting that validation. And that's why I used to say to, a lot of times when I would speak to community groups and talk to parents, I'm like, it doesn't matter, especially now, I mean, when we started with social media and everything else, it doesn't matter where these girls are. If they're gonna find love or something, it's almost like like an abusive type of relation, where they're going to try to find that, keep running back to it, because again, it's a validation for them, and it's like that matriarchal, connection that they have to have. And that's from the most of the girls and with the women that I've come in contact with, I felt that was kind of the common denominator with them.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So how do women's experiences in gangs differ from the men's, or do they?
Well, I think the women's experience different from the gangs is, I think that because of the stereotype. I think there's a lot of stereotypes with that I think that they feel that they have to prove themselves even more, because they want it, that it's not automatic they're going to get that respect. And I think that there's, like I said, a lot of stereotypes to think, hey, we can't think that somebody, like a girl who, again, they have this again, that envision of what they think a female gang member looks like. And I think that differs a lot, because that, again, the gang, how the gangs operate, and how the gangs, they how how they, the men look at things differently. So I think that's how you said their view, because of the whole thing with the stereotypes. I mean, I always used to say all the time. I used to testify in court a lot, and I mean, back in the '90s. So I guess you're in my age, maybe like within understanding certain roles and certain times. But you remember the movie My Cousin Vinny, right? Marissa Tomei, another Brooklyn girl. When she got on the
Yes.
stand, when she got right, people stereotyped her for that she got on the stand to talk about the cars, and nobody could think that this girl can talk about cars better than any mechanic that was in the shop. And again, and being a female officer and going up on the stand, that I think that I used to joke around and saying, like when I'd go up on the stand, people, especially again with my New York accent, right, and I that people would never think that I can articulate the understanding about gangs and about female gangs. And I think that the same thing with again, and like I said, I know I keep repeating myself, but I really want to drive that point home about the stereotype of what people don't think that girls can be the leaders, the girls can be as violent, the girls can be as dangerous. Meanwhile, I used to say it all the time when I was teaching my law enforcement. That's the best kept secret, because again, when they're searching somebody or they're looking in the car, they're not focusing on that female. So they're going to get power. They're going to get they're going to, because they know that they're going to try to take advantage of that as much as they can, because they know they're going to get undetected. So that stereotype, like I said, it really changes the whole dynamic when you're dealing with the female.
Yeah. Yes. I would like to go back to when you were working at Rutgers. Uh, so how did you develop the curriculum, and could you explain what the curriculum was?
Yes, yes. I developed the curriculum. I worked with, I said, I went through training as a police officer. We have this thing called MOI. It's called Method of Instruction. You go through a program where you learn to become an instructor. So you learn through that curriculum that you know how to develop a curriculum. You know how to develop an agenda to try to put trainings together. So it's a baseline. So when I went to Rutgers on the higher ed side, it was, again, I worked with a lot of the professionals that did this for a living. That's what their job was, to develop curriculums. So so I sat with them for many sessions to try to see how I could take this curriculum that I had teaching law enforcement, how we can develop it for the School of Social Work. And I sat with the curriculum developers, and they were great, again, amazing. They were great mentors, and they basically gave me like a template of kind of how, and how to put the curriculum together, and how to plug the things in, and how to make this a training, like a full 8 hour, a full day training to put on their rosters for as an elective training for there, because again, a lot of the social workers in New Jersey have to have certain hours of training. So this was a training, but it was an elective training, and this was a curriculum I developed. It wasn't going into their main curriculum. It was mine. Nobody else can teach it. It wasn't like a train the trainer type of thing. It was something that we developed that was owned to me. And going through that, I mean, that was a phenomenal learning experience for me, because I understood like the higher ed part of it, and how to put a training manual together, how to put, I had these PowerPoints that I worked, when I was teaching through my conferences, and doing my law enforcement training, my community training. But now this was like legit. This was like, working with, like I said, with the higher education, understanding the processes, how they develop it, and with the team. And then once they gave me those tools and how to plug it in, it kind of just took off from there. And it was, like I said, it was such an enlightening experience for me, because I took excerpts of the documentary that I worked, and try to break down some of the women that were in the program, try to understand the mindsets and the different ways how girls were coming into the gang, and really the program kind of highlighted that, because we had a few girls that were actually came in different ways, and how their stories were, and I was able to kind of articulate their stories through the training, to try to make them understand that maybe in different ways of how maybe some of the females that they be working with, how to interact with them, how to maybe how to work with them in order to maybe pull them out of the situation or look at the warning signs before they actually got to that step. So there was different pronged approach, and we would do breakout sessions where we would do mock interviews and how. And it was, and it was like, I was like, wow, like I can make this really, really fun and interesting. And like I said, we would have these breakout sessions where we'd have, two people doing the interview, one person who would actually have to act as a female gang member and make up a persona, and they'd have to see if the social workers can actually detect what they were, what gang they were. So we'd have like a little bit of acting in there, and it was just it was try to make it fun, but make it really enlightening and interesting, so they can get something out of it. And like I said, the greatest gift that I got out of it, because they would tell me their stories about the interactions they had, and on a, they're, you're talking about people that are working with families. They have to remove children from homes, which is very, again, here, they're going in there not as law enforcement, not as, but they have to go in some of the worst situations, the most tense situation, emotional situations, when most families are the most vulnerable, and they have to have those interactions, and they have to, maybe, like I said, remove these kids out of the situation. And like I said, through learning from them, like, and each class that I did, I took something from each of those classes and then developed that, and would speak about that in other trainings that I did, like something I had learned through the division of families. They was, because when one of the videos in the TV show, one of the girls is actually in prison, and you see her leaving the prison. She's got like she's taken all her belongings, black garbage bags, and I was like, wow, I said, thinking about all her property, everything this girl owned, this female gangman that left, she was out of, I think, Suffolk County jail, and she didn't know where she was going, taking all her belongings in a plastic bag. And they explained to me that through the children and families in Jersey, they no longer, they donate suitcases, because it's like it's like it's trying to make them feel worthy, that if they have to move to different foster homes, these girls, and go into safer situations, they don't want them leaving those situations with a plastic garbage bag. They have to, give them that empowerment to have their own luggage, their own things, their own property. So it's dignified, and it has, there's we're showing empathy towards these young girls, that they take ownership of and pride of their things. So that was something that I really, like I said, that I will remember for the rest of my life. Like I said, and I would take those trainings and learn from those social workers and bring that into my work. And it changed me as a detective, and how I, again, see things from the other side. And they used to say to me all the time, when you retire, you become a social worker, because I had such great respect for the work that they did, and it really, it changed me in such a positive way, that I could, it's like I yearn to go to every time I'd go to these trainings, and the feedback was wonderful. And it was very validating to me that I was presenting something, giving them, I said, if I can train one person, or help them get one girl out of a gang, or save them from joining a gang, that's really what it's all about, sharing that information for the people that, again, because again, when we don't want to, we don't want these girls getting arrested. We want to help them before they get to that point when they have to interact with law enforcement. But we want to, have a positive interaction. But if, again, I always say all the time, that's kind of like the last leg. We want to get to them before that aspect. So
Absolutely.
that's.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like prevention work. I do prevention work here in Delaware. I'm a community outreach specialist, and I focus on youth getting involved in alternative activities. One of them is a program I have called More Than Fitness, where we go work out, and then we'll have life discussions after each workout. So it just keeps them involved in positive interactions and lifestyle.
Yep. And I have again, another experience I had, like, especially when I was up at Passaic County. There was a middle school that was in the city of Passaic, and they had a lot of issues, and with female only gangs. And these girls, I mean, there was videos all over social media about these girls. I mean, dangerous. There was major assaults. A lot of things were happening. So I was working with some of the school counselors, and we would go in and talk to a lot of, myself and one of the other gentlemen I work with in the sheriff's department. We would go in and work with these girls, and just kind of give them an outlet and sit with them with the school counselor. And you know what, the first couple of times that we went in, we would go like once a week, every week. And one of the things the girls which again resonated with me for the rest of my life, that said to me, she's like, are you, after the first or second time we're there, she's like, are you going to come back? I'm like, of course I'm going to come back. And she's like, so I said, oh, why wouldn't you think we're going to come back? She's like, because again, so many people make promises to these kids and they don't follow through on it. And I was like, no, if I tell you, if I tell you that I'm going to be somewhere, I will be there. If I can't come, if we can't come the next week, I'll let you know. I'm just not going to not show up. And that consistency was so important for them. And these girls, we had girls that were friends since they were kids, like kindergartners, that were in different gangs, and they were ready to kill each other. And we made these girls in a closed environment, away from the other girls that were in the gang. We had them in separate groups, and we made these girls sit together, talk, learn about each other, and say, you guys both like mac and cheese, you like the same music. Like, now because you're in a different gang, you girls, since you were friends in kindergarten, you're not gonna be friends anymore. And it was like I said, that was enlightening for me. Especially when these girls are asking me, am I going to come back? I'm like, this was a gift to me that they were giving by letting me be there with them. And it was a remarkable experience. Stayed with them. They ended up graduating the middle school. They asked us to come to the graduation. When they graduated, we were right there front and center when they graduated middle school to go into the high school. And again, it was really about consistency with these kids. And that's the key, I think, with a lot of the prevention, is that people make promises to these kids and there's no consistency. And that's, if you have that consistency, it can make such a difference in their lives. And I'm, like I said, you could speak better than for me. Than, I said, you do this every day, but I said, that's from my experience, is what I have seen that really made a difference with these kids, is having that consistency with them.
Absolutely. Consistency and having a safe space for them. Yeah, I agree. So you discuss many different things. How can law enforcement and community members aid in identifying women in gangs?
I believe that they should be, again, be open-minded and not have a stereotype of what they think that a gang member looks like, because it could be anyway. They should have to be good listeners. They have to, and they said this was, it's all about interviewing. It's all about having those techniques to be able to speak to people, to try to get the information from them and build that trust. And like I said, I've taught not even interview and interrogation. I'm talking about debriefing. I'm talking about just sitting down and having a conversation with somebody and asking the right questions. Not accusatory, not judgmental. And I say this all the time, even in my trainings. I'm like, if I'm not the right person that's going to be able to get the information from somebody, again, sometimes the women felt more comfortable talking to me. Sometimes they didn't, because when sometimes they weren't comfortable speaking to me, because it was intimidating to them to feel that I was going to be judged. Not that I would be judgmental, but they would think another woman was being judgmental of them. And if a male can get the information better to speak to them, to pull out that information, to find out what they're involved in and what they're doing, I leave my ego at the door, because at the end of the day, it's about getting the information, helping that individual. And again, it's all about, I think it's about how you can build that trust to ask the right questions to find out what's happened. And I said, even the dynamic of dealing with women is very different. I tell a lot of my officers that I used to train, I say, listen, when you're dealing with a female, we always taught, like, if people don't look you in the face, that they're not being truthful, they're not being forthcoming. A lot of these females, especially the ones that that are being trafficked within the gang, that are within the gang, they might be able to make eye contact with another man, because their handler, whoever their big homie, or whoever their gang member, that's the one that's their OG or whatever, if they're taking care of them, they're not allowed to look at another man. They're not allowed to make that eye contact. So I always said, don't, especially with your females, don't take that at face value to automatically think that they're not being truthful with you. Because if that, again, because dealing the dynamic with a female and speaking to her is going to be very, very different, because they're going to be even more distrustful than the male gang member. So if you can build that trust and break them down and let them, trust you, that's where you're going to break those barriers to be able to get the information, to really ask the right questions to find out what they're involved in.
Thank you. And that's a great message to those out there that are dealing with this. So Nancy, if you have any final message you would like to share, can you share that with us?
My final message is that I just want everybody to know, to not have any stereotypes about female gangs. I want everybody to understand that it could be anybody's daughter, it could be anybody's sister, it could be anybody's cousin, it could be anybody's aunt. It's just a matter of that we have to show that validation, that love, and we have to know who our girls are with, ask questions. And I know, listen, I have two daughters that, the teenage years, and sometimes they're not ready to talk. Then, but just be there, observe, listen, and just be supportive. Because again, don't have any stereotype of who you think can or cannot be in become a female gang member. Just we have to love our girls. We have to support them. We have to rise them up, and just validate them and make them know how beautiful they are in each of their own way.
Thank you, Nancy. That's
Thank
great.
you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I feel blessed to be able to have it, and I really commend you, and I have such great respect for the work that you're doing. Continue what you're doing, and really, God bless you for, being one of the ones that can be the great example that you were in it and you got out of it. So just keep it going and keep it moving forward. So thank you, and thank you again for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom and your talents and everything that you have done for us in the community, and continue to do what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
We hope you found this episode informative. I look forward to continuing the conversation next week on gang culture. Stay tuned as we dive into an enlightening conversation with our guests.